I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who cheats on her husband. I used to scoff at those stories, women in suburban neighborhoods, sipping wine at noon, gossiping about their secret affairs. That wasn't me. I was a good wife. A loyal wife. And yet, here I am, sitting in my car, hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turn white, replaying every moment that led me to this point. It started 6 months ago, when we hired him. Jake. The gardener. Our house had always needed a little work in the backyard, but Ethan, my husband, was too busy with work to care. He was a lawyer, one of those high-powered types who spent more time in conference rooms than at home. When he suggested hiring someone to fix up the garden, I didn't argue. I figured it would be nice to have a space where I could drink my coffee in the mornings, maybe even read a book in the sun. Jake was different from what I expected. I thought we'd get some middle-aged guy who smelled like cigarettes and sweat, but Jake, he was young, probably late 20s, maybe early 30s. Tall, broad shoulders, sun-kissed skin, and that easy kind of smile that made me feel like he actually saw me. Not just as some rich man's wife, but as a woman. At first, our conversations were casual. "Morning, Mrs. Carter," he'd say, wiping sweat from his forehead as he dug into the earth. "Call me Lauren," I corrected him more than once, but he kept up the formalities. I liked watching him work. Not in a creepy way, at least, that's what I told myself. But there was something about the way his muscles flexed when he lifted heavy bags of soil, the way his shirt clung to his back when he wiped dirt from his hands. He was real. Tangible. Unlike Ethan, who felt more like a shadow passing through my life these days. It happened on a particularly hot afternoon. I had brought Jake a glass of lemonade, standing there in my sundress, feeling strangely nervous. His eyes flickered over me, and for the first time, I wondered if he noticed the way I lingered. "Thanks," he said, taking a sip. His eyes met mine, and I swear, there was a moment, just a brief one, where neither of us moved. "You work too hard," I said, trying to make small talk, but my voice came out softer than I intended. He smirked. "And you don't?" I laughed. "What do I do that's so exhausting?" He set the glass down, stepping just a little closer. "You watch me a lot." My heart slammed against my ribs. Was he calling me out? Or was he flirting? I couldn't tell, but I knew that I didn't want to move away. I don't know who leaned in first. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was him. But suddenly, his lips were on mine, rough and demanding, and I didn't stop him. I should have. I should have pulled away, reminded myself that I had a husband who loved me, who worked hard to provide for me. But all I could think about was how good it felt to be wanted. We stumbled into the tool shed, our hands desperate, bodies pressed together. It was reckless. Messy. The air was thick with the scent of soil and sweat, and for the first time in years, I felt alive. Afterward, I sat on the floor, my dress wrinkled, my hair a mess, staring at the wooden walls of the shed like they held the answers to the questions I didn't want to ask myself. Jake pulled his shirt back on, looking at me carefully. "You okay?" I nodded, but I wasn't. I was a woman who had just shattered everything she thought she was. "I should go," I whispered, standing up, fixing my dress as if that would somehow erase what had just happened. He didn't try to stop me. Maybe he knew there was nothing left to say. Now, sitting in my car, I glance at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My lipstick is smudged. My wedding ring still gleams on my finger. I don't know what I'll say to Ethan when I get home. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. But one thing is certain, no matter how hard I try, I'll never look at my garden the same way again. I thought I could forget it. That I could go home, take a long shower, scrub every inch of my skin, and pretend it never happened. But it wasn't that easy. The guilt hit me in waves, unexpected and cruel. I'd be folding laundry, watching TV, or cooking dinner, and suddenly, I'd remember the way Jake's hands felt on me, the way his breath was hot against my neck, the way I lost myself in him. And worse, I liked it. Ethan didn't notice anything different. Or if he did, he didn't say a word. He was still working late, still bringing home case files that kept him locked in his office until midnight. When he did kiss me, it was a quick peck, an absent-minded gesture, nothing like the hunger I'd felt in that shed. That was the worst part. I didn't just cheat on my husband. I realized, in that moment, how long it had been since I'd felt desired. I avoided Jake for the next few days. I watched him from the window instead of stepping outside. He seemed to get the message because he didn't try to talk to me, didn't even glance in my direction. But on Friday, when Ethan left early for work, I finally walked outside. I needed to clear the air, to say something, anything, that would make this whole thing feel less suffocating. Jake was kneeling by the flower beds, his hands deep in the soil, when he heard my footsteps. He didn't look up right away. "You finally decided to stop hiding," he muttered. I swallowed hard. I wasn't hiding. He let out a dry laugh, brushing dirt off his hands as he stood. Could have fooled me. For a second, we just stared at each other. The tension between us was different now, not just lust, but something heavier. "I can't do this again," I said, even though my body was already betraying me, my pulse racing. His jaw clenched. "I never asked you to." I should have walked away. I should have left it at that. But my feet stayed rooted to the ground. "Was it just sex for you?" I whispered. He let out a slow breath, his eyes searching mine. "I don't know. Maybe at first." A lump formed in my throat. "And now?" Jake took a step closer, his voice lower, softer. "Now, I can't stop thinking about you." The truth was, I couldn't stop thinking about him either. I hated myself for it. The second time it happened, I told myself it would be the last. That I just needed to get it out of my system. That if I gave in one final time, I could move on. But there's no such thing as a last time when it comes to an affair. Because once you cross that line, you don't just go back to who you were before. You keep crossing it, again and again, until the line is so blurred you don't even recognize yourself anymore. I spent weeks trapped in a cycle of guilt and desire. Every morning, I promised myself I would stop. Every afternoon, I found myself beneath Jake in that damn shed or up against the garden wall, my hands tangled in his hair, my lips desperate to drown out the voice in my head telling me how wrong it all was. And every night, I went back to Ethan. I kissed him. I pretended. I told myself I still loved him. Maybe I did. Maybe that's what made it worse. It all came crashing down on a Tuesday. Ethan came home early. I didn't hear the front door open. Didn't hear his footsteps. But I heard his voice. "What the hell is this?" I froze. Jake and I were tangled together in the shed, half-dressed, caught in the worst possible way. My heart stopped. Ethan stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable, his face pale, his hands clenched into fists. For the first time since this started, reality hit me like a train. This wasn't a fantasy anymore. This wasn't some secret I could keep tucked away. I had destroyed my marriage. And there was no taking it back. The silence was suffocating. Ethan stood there, his jaw tight, his eyes flicking between me and Jake. I could see the exact moment it hit him, when the pieces fell into place and his worst suspicions were confirmed. He didn't yell. He didn't throw punches. He just stood there, breathing hard, his face a mask of something I couldn't quite place. Jake was the first to move. He pulled away from me, his expression unreadable, and took a slow step back, hands raised like he was surrendering. "Ethan," I started, but I had no idea what I was going to say. What excuse could I possibly give? That I was lonely? That I missed him? That I hadn't meant to fall into this spiral? It wouldn't matter. None of it would. Ethan let out a sharp breath, shaking his head. How long? His voice was quiet. Too quiet. I swallowed hard. Ethan, please. How long, Lauren? He repeated, his voice colder this time. I felt the answer stick in my throat. Did I tell him the truth? That it had been weeks? That every time I kissed him goodnight, I carried the taste of another man on my lips? Jake, to his credit, didn't try to defend me. He didn't jump in, didn't try to smooth things over. He just stood there, looking at me like he already knew what was coming. 2 months, I whispered. Ethan's expression didn't change. If anything, he seemed eerily calm, like he had already braced himself for the worst. He exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face before nodding once, like he had made some decision in his head. Get out, he said. At first, I wasn't sure who he was talking to. Me? Jake? Then his eyes locked on mine, and I felt my stomach drop. You, he clarified, his voice like ice. I want you gone. My throat tightened. Ethan, wait. Don't. He shook his head, his face unreadable. You made your choice. Now live with it. I turned to Jake, but he wasn't looking at me anymore. He just stood there, silent. I don't know what I expected. For him to defend me? To say something? But this wasn't a romance novel. There was no grand declaration of love. Just the cold, ugly truth of what we had done. I gathered my clothes, my hands shaking as I pulled my dress back over my body. My mind raced, searching for the right words, but there weren't any. Because Ethan was right. I had made my choice. And now, I had to live with it. I packed my bags that night. Ethan didn't try to stop me. He didn't ask me to stay. He didn't even watch as I left. The house that had once felt like a home was suddenly nothing more than walls and memories I had destroyed. I sat in my car for a long time before starting the engine, staring at the front door, hoping, maybe stupidly, that he would come out, that he would fight for me, for us. But he didn't. And deep down, I knew he never would. I drove away with no destination in mind, my heart pounding, my mind spinning. Jake didn't call. He didn't text. Whatever we had, whatever it was, it died in that shed the moment Ethan found us. It's been 3 months. I got an apartment downtown. Small. Empty. Ethan filed for divorce. There was no drawn-out fight, no messy court battle. Just papers signed, assets divided, a life unraveled with the stroke of a pen. I saw Jake once after that. At a coffee shop. He was with someone else, a girl about my age, smiling, laughing, like nothing had ever happened. He didn't see me. Or if he did, he didn't acknowledge me. I didn't approach him. Because the truth is, it wasn't love. It wasn't fate or passion or some epic, tragic romance. It was a mistake. A moment of weakness that cost me everything. And now, I have to live with it. 3 months turned into 6. Then a year. Divorce is a strange thing. At first, it feels like grief, raw, unbearable. Like a death, but worse, because the person you lost is still out there, living their life without you. I spent weeks staring at my phone, my thumb hovering over Ethan's contact. I rehearsed apologies in my head, imagined every possible scenario where he might forgive me. But the truth is, some things can't be undone. Ethan didn't block me. He didn't send angry texts. He just disappeared from my life. And maybe that was the worst part. I found a new job. Nothing glamorous, just office work, something to keep me busy. I kept my head down, avoided dating, avoided anything that reminded me of what I had lost. One night, I found myself parked outside our old house. The garden was different now, new flowers, a trimmed lawn. Someone else was taking care of it. Maybe even living there. It wasn't my home anymore. I don't know what I expected. Some kind of grand revelation? Closure? But all I felt was emptiness. Then, one evening, I ran into Ethan. It was in a bookstore, of all places. I had a habit of going there late at night, walking the aisles, pretending I had somewhere to be. I turned a corner, and there he was. He looked good. Healthier, lighter. The lines of stress on his face had softened. He wasn't wearing his wedding ring anymore. Neither was I. For a long moment, we just stood there, staring. "Hey," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Hey," he replied, nodding. The silence stretched between us, filled with things we'd never say. I wanted to tell him I was sorry. That I regretted everything. That if I could take it all back, I would. But I didn't. Because I knew it wouldn't change anything. Instead, I just smiled, soft, small, the kind that said, "I hope you're okay." He smiled back, and for the first time in a long time, I let go. People think affairs are about passion, about excitement, about some grand love story waiting to unfold. But that's a lie. Affairs are about brokenness. About loneliness. About looking for something in someone else because you've lost it in yourself. I lost everything for a moment of desire. But in the end, I found something, too. A lesson. A truth. And the strength to move on.